The smell reaches you first, thick, sour, unmistakably human. It seeps from beneath the gilt doors of the royal bedchamber, mingling with the beeswax and cigar smoke that cling to every velvet curtain. The air of Buckingham Palace, once perfumed with imported roses, now carries the stench of illness. You hear the rasp of labored breath, the low creak of the bed as a massive body shifts under embroidered linen. Somewhere beyond the door, the King of Great Britain wheezes like a dying engine. His skin, once flushed from champagne and scandal, has turned a waxy gray. Outside, horses stamp on wet cobblestones. Inside, the Empire's heartbeat falters. The physicians whisper, but nothing they do can turn back what has already begun. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness? If stories like this one hold you still in the quiet hours, when history breathes again through dust and candlelight, subscribe. And let the next tale find you in the dark. Tell us where you are listening from, and what hour of night has found you here. Your presence turns these forgotten moments into memory again. Like this, comment your country, and let the silence of the past speak to you. It is the spring of 1910, and the empire is vast enough to circle the globe. Yet its monarch lies dying in a single dim room. Edward VII, the man once mocked as Bertie the Playboy, has outlived his mother, Queen Victoria, and reigned barely 9 years. He was the first modern celebrity king, charming, indulgent, always surrounded by mistresses, cigars, and laughter. But the years of pleasure have left his body crumbling beneath the weight of its own excess. You move unseen through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, where the hush of heavy carpets hides the panic of servants. Every hour, more physicians arrive. Sir Francis Laking, Lord Dawson of Penn, Sir Frederick Treves, their boots polished to mirror shine, their faces drawn tight with failure. They call it bronchitis, pneumonia, angina pectoris, medical words meant to tidy the spectacle of a king dying breath by breath. He is 68, swollen by decades of rich food and pipe smoke. His heart, once capable of chasing every thrill Europe could offer, now stutters like a misfired gun. His hands tremble, his fingers, once wrapped around the handles of hunting rifles and champagne flutes, twitch helplessly against the linen. The servants have turned down the gas lamps to hide the pallor that creeps over him. Even the ticking clocks are muffled under cloth, for time has become indecent here. Outside, London continues. Crowds move through fog. Omnibuses rattle over bridges. The smell of coal thick in the air. But within these walls, everything is held in suspension. The palace windows are sealed, the curtains drawn, the newspapers waiting for official statements that never come. You pass the Queen, Alexandra of Denmark, standing motionless in the antechamber. Her face carved from restraint. She has lived through his betrayals and still holds vigil, refusing to leave his side. Each evening, the doctors inject digitalis to steady his faltering pulse. They rub brandy on his gums to coax his tongue to life. A silver inhaler wheezes softly, releasing clouds of menthol and hope. Yet the cough keeps returning, wet, violent, echoing through the corridors like distant gunfire. The attendants carry out bowls of blood-tinged sputum and speak only in whispers. The king insists on continuing his duties, even as pain grips his chest. I shall not give in, he rasps. I shall go on. But the empire can feel it, the unraveling. Across the colonies, telegraphs hum with speculation. The king is ill, perhaps dying. Ministers gather in shadowed rooms, preparing for a change that feels too soon and yet inevitable. In Paris, former lovers whisper prayers. In Sandringham, his beloved estate, the horses stand idle, as if they too sense that their master will not ride again. You drift closer to the bedchamber. The light inside is dim, filtered through crimson drapes. The once jovial monarch lies half-propped among pillows embroidered with the royal crest. His chest rises unevenly. A faint whistle escapes each exhale. The physician bends low, counting the seconds between breaths. Edward opens his eyes only briefly now, mumbling fragments, names of his dogs, the racecourse, perhaps the memory of a woman's perfume. The courtiers pretend not to hear. This is how an empire ends, not with the crash of cannons or the fall of banners, but with the fragile sound of a failing heart inside a silent palace. You stand in the doorway, unseen, as the nurses replace a damp cloth on his forehead. The air tastes of sweat, tobacco, and approaching death. Soon, the king who made Europe laugh will fall silent, and the age that bears his name, the Edwardian era, will close like a heavy velvet curtain. The first cough begins as a curiosity, a small interruption amid laughter in the smoking room at Buckingham Palace. You are there, in the corner, unseen, while the king leans back in his leather chair, surrounded by the blue haze of cigar smoke. His companions, politicians, racehorse owners, and the occasional actress, raise their glasses as he chuckles. Yet his mirth ends with a rasp that lingers too long. He waves it off with a jeweled hand, the rings pressing into swollen fingers. A chill from Sandringham, he says, but the chill does not leave. By April 1910, the cough deepens. You follow him down the corridors as footmen help him into his carriage. The air already thick with spring rain and soot. His once broad chest heaves beneath layers of satin and fur. The royal doctors prescribe rest, morphine, and digitalis, but the king refuses idleness. The newspapers report his presence at a state dinner one evening. Though you see how he barely touches the food, his appetite, the same that once conquered banquets, has begun to abandon him. When he removes his gloves, you glimpse the mottling along his knuckles, a bruise like purple. The first visible map of dying circulation. His breath carries the sweetness of decay, that unmistakable smell of fluid gathering where air should be. The palace corridors grow quieter. Courtiers no longer gossip, they listen. The king insists on travel to Biarritz, hoping that the sea air will soothe his lungs. You drift beside him through the private train compartments, the rhythm of the rails echoing the labor of his heart. Even the sunlight of the south cannot disguise his decline. When he steps onto the promenade, crowds cheer, but he leans on two canes, his face flushed with fever. The French papers, always eager for scandal, whisper that the Playboy king looks spent. He returns to England pale as parchment. Back at Buckingham Palace, the physicians gather in low conversation. Lord Knollys, his private secretary, orders privacy. Sir Francis Laking notes in his journal that the king suffers from acute bronchitis superimposed on chronic heart disease. You hear them argue softly. Should they bleed him? Should they apply poultices? They decide on mustard compresses across his chest, though the skin beneath already blisters from previous attempts. Night after night, you drift through his chamber and watch the ritual repeat. The nurse wrings out cloths in steaming water. The physician warms a spoon to stir the digitalis solution. The king groans in half-sleep, his breath rattling. On the bedside table lie relics of another life, silver matchbox, ivory-handled cigar cutter, a framed photograph of Alice Keppel, his final mistress. The photograph is turned toward him, face down, after the Queen's arrival. May 1st, the newspapers announce that the king is indisposed but improving. You know it is a lie. His ankles have begun to swell, his urine dark as brandy. The veins in his temples pulse with each labored beat of his heart. The air in the room grows heavy, thick with the scent of carbolic acid and sweat. The curtains remain drawn to keep the light from his eyes. He complains that the world spins whenever he opens them. The palace gardens bloom outside, tulips rising in disciplined rows. Yet the king has not stepped beyond his bed for days. You hear the faint scrape of a wheeled chair brought to his room. Though he never uses it, he insists on standing for the prime minister's visit, gripping the mantle until his knuckles whiten. I must see to my duty, he whispers, a line more pride than strength. The meeting lasts only minutes. That night, his breathing stops twice. The physicians exchange glances and write in silence. They know what is coming but fear to speak it in front of the Queen. You notice her entering quietly, her black dress whispering against the carpet. She takes his hand, the same hand that once held the scepter of an empire, and murmurs something in Danish. He answers only with a shiver. May 3rd Road. London's fog creeps into the palace through unseen cracks. In the corridor, servants place towels under the door to muffle the coughing fits. You slip past them and stand by the bed. His body seems smaller now, shrinking into itself. The doctors have begun injecting camphor and ether, desperate stimulants meant to jolt the heart. Each dose brings a few shallow breaths. Then the same dreadful stillness. His lips turn the color of lead. That evening, a messenger arrives from Marlborough House with urgent dispatches. But no one reads them. The king mutters about the Derby Stakes, the horse race he founded and never missed. I must live to see it run. He gasps. Lord Knollys bows his head, knowing he will not. May 5th. The bronchitis becomes pneumonia. The physicians record extensive congestion of the lungs. You can hear it, the slow gurgle, the sound of drowning on dry land. The room smells faintly of iron and roses, the scent of blood and decay intermingled. The nurse changes his linen again and again, each time revealing a body that has begun to weep fluid through the pores. The king tries to speak but can no longer form words, only a hoarse moan escapes. The bells of Westminster ring faintly through the drizzle outside, yet inside the palace, the ticking of one clock feels louder than the city. You see one of the doctors slip a note to Lord Knollys. Prepare the Prince of Wales. It is time. When George, his son, enters the room, the king opens his eyes one final time. God bless you, boy, he whispers, the breath barely audible. His pupils dilate, his gaze fixes on the ceiling. For a long moment, the entire room forgets to breathe with him. Then, slowly, the color drains from his cheeks, leaving the waxen stillness that no crown can command. You remain as they draw the sheet over his face. The gold tassels on the bed curtains tremble in the draught from an opened door. A servant stifles a sob. Outside, the carriages line up in the courtyard, wheels glistening with rain. The Empire, for a heartbeat, holds its breath. In the silence that follows, you realize how small a man becomes once his voice ceases. The king who loved the noise of crowds, the thrill of scandal, the applause of Europe, has vanished into a hush so complete it feels sacred. You step back, unseen, as the first candles are lit around his bed. Their flames sway gently in the stale air, reflecting in the glass of his untouched brandy glass. This is the beginning of the end, not only for a man, but for an age that mistook pleasure for permanence. At first, there is no sound, only the slow, deliberate click of boots in the corridor as word spreads through the palace. The king is dead. You follow the message as it passes from mouth to mouth, an echo that gathers weight. Servants bow their heads. Telephones ring with the tremor of disbelief. In a room that smells of camphor and extinguished candles, the queen stands beside the covered body. Her face is pale, her hands folded tightly, her lips moving in silent prayer. Outside, dawn creeps over London like a veil of ash. The gas lamps flicker in the mist, their reflections wavering in puddles along the Mall. The flag over Buckingham Palace remains at full mast until the official proclamation. Protocol forbids haste. Even in grief, you drift through the front hall as the royal messengers depart on horseback. Black armbands gleaming against red livery. Their hooves strike the cobblestones with the rhythm of a funeral drum. In the king's bedchamber, the physicians remove their gloves one final time. Lord Dawson of Penn writes his last note. Death at 11:45 p.m., May 6, 1910. He places his pen beside the brandy glass, now crusted at the rim. The room still holds the smell of illness, menthol, sweat, and iron. The nurses fold the sheets with trembling fingers. A servant gathers the personal effects, the ivory cross that hung near his bed, the photograph of Queen Alexandra, the gold watch that ticked through his final breaths. The new king, George V, enters quietly. You watch him approach the bed, his face expressionless, as if already wearing the mask of duty. He kneels, touches the linen covering his father's face, and whispers a short prayer. Outside, the palace bells toll 12 times. The empire has changed hands, though no one yet dares to say the words aloud. By morning, the palace gates are surrounded. Crowds of Londoners, clerks, widows, beggars, press against the railings, craning for a glimpse of the windows. Many had once laughed at Edward the Caresser, but now they weep as though he were kin. A woman drops to her knees in the mud, crossing herself again and again. Others bring flowers, violets, lilies, roses wrapped in newspaper. You move among them unseen, feeling the strange unity of grief that hovers over the city. Inside, the king's body is prepared according to ancient ritual. The court physicians wash him with rose water and alcohol, comb his graying beard, and dress him in the uniform of the field marshal. The sash of the Order of the Garter across his chest. His medals, cold, heavy symbols of glory, are pinned carefully to the fabric. You stand by as his eyes are closed and 2 silver coins placed upon the lids. The face that once charmed half of Europe now looks carved in marble. In the corridor, the scent of burning wax replaces the stench of sickness. Hundreds of candles line the hall leading to the chamber, their flames swaying in the draught. A guard of honor takes position, officers of the household cavalry in black plumes and polished cuirasses. Their sabers gleam under the flicker of light. The hush is absolute. Only the faint hiss of candle wicks breaks it. You drift through the grand staircase, where the Queen meets the Archbishop of Canterbury. Her voice is low, steady. He suffered long, but God was merciful. She orders that the people be allowed to see him. The people must not think their king hidden away. That afternoon, the chamber is opened. The line begins before noon. You move among the mourners, footmen, maids, soldiers, each crossing themselves as they pass the bier. The king lies beneath a canopy of crimson velvet, his hands folded over a golden crucifix. His face has begun to darken slightly, the skin turning waxen beneath the layers of powder. The air is cold enough to preserve him for now, though the doctors exchange worried glances. The candles consume oxygen faster than the open windows can replace it. Outside, the city transforms. Shop windows are draped in black crepe. Theaters close their doors. Church bells toll from dawn until dusk. In every post office, clerks wear mourning bands. Even the omnibuses run slower, their drivers bowing as they pass the palace. The newspapers print full-page portraits bordered in black. One headline reads, "The king is dead. The empire mourns." You follow the cortege when it moves from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall for public lying in state. The streets are lined 10 deep. Soldiers from every colony, India, Canada, Australia, South Africa, stand in formation, their uniforms glinting under gray skies. The gun carriage rolls slowly over wet cobbles, the horses draped in black netting. The coffin is draped with the royal standard, the imperial crown resting on a velvet cushion above it. Rain begins to fall, fine, relentless, like the tears of a city. As the procession turns toward Trafalgar Square, a hush descends so complete that even the horses' breathing can be heard. The clock at St. Martin in the Fields strikes 3. You see faces lifted toward the sky, eyes glistening. Some hold children on their shoulders so they may remember this day when they are old. The empire's grandeur feels fragile, almost human. In Westminster Hall, the vigil begins. 4 guards stand at the corners of the bier, motionless, swords inverted, helmets lowered. The silence is immense. You pass close enough to see the condensation of breath on steel. Every few hours, they are replaced by fresh soldiers, each saluting before taking position. The Queen visits in the late evening, leaning on the arm of her son. Her footsteps echo against the stone as the crowd parts in reverence. She stands for a long moment beside the coffin, then bows her head and turns away. Through the long nights of May, the people keep coming. Old veterans of the Boer War, schoolboys in caps, women clutching handkerchiefs. You drift above them, watching candles burn low, watching faces illuminated briefly by grief and then swallowed by shadow again. Some whisper prayers, others simply stare, as if expecting the king to breathe once more. By the end of the 3rd night, The hall is heavy with the scent of wax and flowers. Thousands have filed past, yet still they come. The guards' eyes redden from exhaustion. But not one breaks formation. Outside, the Thames moves slowly under the bridges, carrying wreaths dropped by unseen hands. It is a peculiar kind of mourning, part devotion, part theater. The empire that once bowed before his pleasures now bows before his silence. You realize that in death, Edward VII has achieved what he never found in life: stillness. When dawn returns on the final day of the vigil, the first rays of sunlight strike the crown atop his coffin. The gems glitter faintly, red and blue sparks across the gloom. For a moment, it looks almost alive. Then the light shifts, and the colors fade back into gray. The doors close. The vigil ends. The king begins his final journey home, to St. George's Chapel, Windsor, where the marble floors wait cold and eternal. The morning of May 20th, 1910, dawns beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver. The air is cold for May, heavy with moisture that clings to uniforms, horses, and the black draped streets of London. You drift among the crowd that gathers along Whitehall. Tens of thousands deep, people have slept on the pavements all night to secure a place: clerks, widows, soldiers on leave. The murmurs fall into silence as the first toll of Big Ben rolls through the mist. From the gates of Westminster Hall, the coffin emerges, draped in the royal standard. It rests upon a gun carriage drawn by 8 chestnut horses, their manes braided with black crape. Atop the coffin gleams the imperial crown, the orb, and the scepter, the 3 symbols of rule that no hand will ever again hold together. Behind them lies a single wreath from Queen Alexandra, made of white lilies and forget-me-nots. You can smell them even above the wet smoke from the torches. A single command cuts through the damp air: slow march. The drums begin, the deep, resonant thud of muffled bass, each beat spaced by eternity. You move alongside the cortege as it begins its slow passage down the Mall. Soldiers line the route: the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream, the Scots Guards, all motionless, rifles inverted. Behind them, rows of colonial troops stand at attention, their faces brown, olive, gold, men drawn from the farthest corners of the empire. Then come the mourners: King George V on horseback, his head bowed beneath a black-plumed helmet. Beside him, Kaiser Wilhelm II, cousin to both the dead and the living king, his iron medals glinting through the drizzle. Princes, dukes, kings from Denmark, Greece, Portugal, and Norway follow, more than 50 sovereigns, their horses stamping softly in unison. Never before, the newspapers will write, had so many crowns bowed before one coffin. You move between them unseen, close enough to hear the rustle of their cloaks, the jingle of harness chains. The procession advances slowly through Trafalgar Square, past the Silent Lions, and onward toward Hyde Park Corner. The pavements are seas of umbrellas, faces pale beneath the black fabric like ghosts watching from another world. When the cortege turns onto Piccadilly, the bells of St. James's ring a low, unbroken note. At Paddington Station, a canopy of mourning bunting covers the platform. The train waits, a royal funeral train, its carriages painted dark maroon, polished brass fittings dulled with cloth. Steam billows around it, turning the air into a white shroud. You follow the pallbearers as they lift the coffin into the carriage lined in violet silk. Inside, 2 soldiers stand guard, bayonets crossed, their faces expressionless. As the whistle sounds, the crowd removes their hats. The train moves slowly out of London, the rhythmic clatter of wheels echoing like a heartbeat fading into distance. You drift alongside, through the misted countryside, where villages have gathered at every crossing. Church bells toll as it passes, women curtsy, men bow their heads, some children hold small flags, too young to understand what they wave for. The journey takes less than an hour. When the train reaches Windsor, the sun breaks faintly through the clouds, a weak light glancing off the wet cobblestones. The coffin is lifted once more onto the gun carriage. Military bands strike the hymn, Now the laborer's task is o'er. You feel the vibration of the drums through the ground. The scent of wet grass and horses fills the air. The route to St. George's Chapel is steep, lined with soldiers and clergy. The great doors of Windsor Castle stand open, the flag at half-mast above its towers. As you follow the procession through the courtyard, you see the Queen again, veiled in black lace, her face almost translucent. She walks slowly, supported by her son, every step an act of endurance. The organ begins to play as the coffin enters the chapel, those deep, ancient notes that seem to rise from the stones themselves. Inside, the air is thick with incense and candlelight. The choir's voices rise, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. I am the resurrection and the life. The Archbishop's voice trembles slightly as he speaks. You drift above the congregation, royalty seated beside soldiers, politicians beside poets, all reduced to the same posture of bowed heads. You catch the glint of tears on polished metals. As the service continues, you move closer to the catafalque. The candles around it flicker, the wax running down like pale veins. The king's coffin lies surrounded by white flowers, roses, carnations, lilies, from every nation of the empire. Their scent is overwhelming, sweet enough to mask the faint odor of preservation oils. The hymns swell and fade. The Queen's hand trembles as she lifts her prayer book. Then comes the final moment. The Archbishop steps forward. His voice, solemn and weary, fills the space. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The coffin descends slowly into the vault below. You lean forward, unseen, and watch as it disappears from sight, swallowed by the stone mouth of the crypt. A hollow thud follows, the sound of the ropes uncoiling. Someone sobs softly in the gallery. When the final hymn ends, the royal family departs in silence. The sunlight through stained glass casts ruby and gold across the empty bier. You linger as the attendants begin to clear the flowers, their petals bruised and wilting. The echo of the procession lingers outside, the roll of carriage wheels, the distant salute of artillery firing across the meadow. Later, when the last of the mourners have gone, the chapel is locked. Dust motes drift through the fading light. You stand before the sealed vault where the king now rests beside generations of monarchs, Victoria, Albert, and the line that will follow. The carved stone bears his name, Edward VII, 1841 to 1910. The candle flames sway one last time before they are snuffed out. And in that instant of darkness, you understand. The empire's heart has stopped beating, yet its shadow will move for decades more. You step backward through the cold air of the chapel, past the scent of dying lilies, past the marble angels frozen in prayer. Outside, the evening light fades over Windsor's towers. The sky is quiet, washed pale by rain. In the silence, you realize the strange stillness that comes after history takes its breath, when even kings must yield to the slow mercy of time. The service has ended. The crowds have dispersed. Yet inside the chapel walls, the work of the living continues. You drift through the stillness of St. George's Chapel, where the echo of the organ still hums faintly under the arches. The king's coffin rests below the stone floor, within the Albert Memorial Chapel, a temporary vault while preparations are made for his permanent tomb. Above ground, attendants move quietly, their boots clicking on marble, carrying sealed jars and linen-wrapped tools. The air smells of wax, myrrh, and the faintest trace of decay, sweet, sour, unmistakably human. Embalming the sovereign is both science and sacrament. The task falls to Sir Francis Laking, the physician who once attended the births of Edward's grandchildren, and to William Henry Freem, the royal undertaker. You follow them through a narrow corridor lit only by gas lamps, where the walls are lined with cold stone. At the end lies a small chamber prepared for the rite, tables draped in oilcloth, bowls of antiseptic solution, surgical instruments gleaming like wet glass. The king's body lies before them, unclothed, already pale as candle wax. His chest bears faint yellow bruises from the physician's last desperate massages. His fingers, once adorned with rings, are swollen and mottled purple. The eyes have been sewn shut, the mouth tied with a linen band. Yet there is still dignity in the stillness, as though the body itself refuses to surrender its rank. Laking checks his notes. The death certificate lists pneumonia following heart failure. The embalmers begin their work. You watch as they wash the body again in rose water and alcohol. Then anoint it with camphorated oil. Beneath the fragrance lies another odor, one the living never forget once they've known it, the slow, metallic sweetness of the beginning of decomposition. The abdomen is opened with practiced precision. You flinch, not from fear, but from the shock of how quickly mortality asserts itself. The lungs, when lifted, are heavy with fluid. The heart, enlarged and hardened from years of strain, lies motionless in its cavity. Each organ is removed, treated with carbolic and glycerin, and placed back after the cavity is filled with preservative cotton. The physicians work without speech. Only the soft scrape of instruments and the hiss of the gas lamp accompany them. The arteries are injected with a mixture of formalin and alcohol, the latest innovation of the early 20th century. The skin tightens slightly, regaining a semblance of life. A faint pink hue returns to the cheeks, a lie of color that fools no one but the camera. The king's face is then powdered with rice starch to dull the unnatural sheen. When they finish, his body is dressed again in full military uniform. Jeweled decorations are pinned to the chest, each carefully positioned according to the records of precedence. His gloved hands are crossed upon his stomach. Between them rests an ivory crucifix. The linen beneath his head is replaced, now perfumed heavily with lavender. Every detail is written down, the measurements, the materials, the precise order of garments, so that future generations will know how a king is made ready for eternity. You linger as the coffin is opened briefly for inspection. The interior glows softly with its satin lining, pale violet, embroidered with the royal monogram. Beneath the head pillow, the undertakers place a sachet of dried herbs and sea salt to absorb moisture. 2 coins rest upon the eyelids still, though their silver edges have begun to tarnish in the damp. Outside the chapel, rain begins again. The wind moans through the narrow passageways, carrying with it the faint toll of a distant bell. The workers pause only briefly before sealing the lid with polished brass screws. Over the coffin's surface, the royal crest gleams faintly in the lamplight. Ani soit qui mal y pense. It is near midnight when they finish. The attendants step back, exhausted, their faces pale from the fumes of disinfectant. They cross themselves and leave in silence. You remain. Through the narrow cracks of the vault door, a thin thread of candlelight still flickers. The air grows stiller, heavier, almost reverent. The king's embalmed form now lies in a world of its own, neither decaying nor alive. Preserved against time yet claimed by it all the same. Days pass. You drift through Windsor's corridors as the flowers from the funeral begin to wither. Their petals darken, curling inward, releasing a faint sourness that seeps through the chapel. The queen orders them replaced daily. Unable to bear the scent of death, her letters, written in the following weeks, reveal her torment. He suffered so greatly, yet I cannot cease to see him still. Reporters speculate that the body may be moved once more to a marble sarcophagus within the royal tomb. Plans are drawn. Sculptors measure the vault. The newspapers print sketches of angels and crowns, though no one will ever see them completed in her lifetime. The doctors meanwhile submit their final report. It is clinical, detached. The heart was much enlarged, the coronary arteries calcified, lungs congested, kidneys contracted. Cause of death, cardiac failure following bronchial pneumonia. You imagine the physicians writing by candlelight, the ink drying above those last words. None of them mention the smell, the silence, or the look in the queen's eyes. Weeks later, when you return to the chapel, the air is cold and dry. The flowers have been removed, the marble floors scrubbed clean. Only the faint trace of formalin lingers. Sharp and ghostly, a royal guard stands at the entrance, motionless as a statue. The vault beneath is sealed with lead, its edges welded against air. And so, the body of the king who once feasted, hunted, and sinned across Europe now rests in antiseptic stillness. No rot, no ruin, only the illusion of eternal sleep. Yet you know that within the silk and metal lies a truth that no empire can preserve. Every preserved body is still in the process of disappearing. You linger a moment longer, unseen, listening to the slow drip of water from the chapel roof. The candlelight fades, the air grows colder, and for the first time since his death, the palace is utterly silent. Somewhere far above, the bells of Windsor strike the hour. The sound rolls over the castle grounds like a sigh, and as the final echo dies, you understand what history never writes, that even the scent of a king can vanish. For the first time in weeks, Windsor wakes to birdsong instead of bells. The black crape still hangs from every window, but the sound of life has begun to seep back into the air. You drift above the castle grounds as servants sweep the last fallen petals from the courtyard. The scent of lavender and formalin lingers faintly, blending with dew and stone. The king is gone, yet the palace breathes again, slowly, uncertainly, like a body relearning to live after a wound. In London, mourning has become its own kind of order. Streets remain hushed. Black ribbons flutter from gas lamps. The theaters stay dark. Shopkeepers wear armbands as if uniforms of loyalty. Even laughter sounds cautious, as though the city itself fears to disturb the silence that has settled over the empire. The newspapers still print the king's portrait each morning, framed in black borders now curling at the corners. Headlines praise his charm, his diplomacy, his love of peace. None mention the indulgence, the scandal, the smoke curling from his endless cigars. Death has washed the slate clean, and the public clings to that purity. You move through Buckingham Palace, where Queen Alexandra now lives surrounded by quiet. Her black veil trails across the marble floors like a shadow that refuses to fade. In her rooms, curtains remain half-drawn. The air smells of violets and the sea. She writes letter after letter to the heads of Europe, her handwriting thin and fragile. I feel as though a great light has gone out of my life, and I wander now in the twilight. The queen refuses to remove her mourning dress. For the rest of her days, she will wear black. The doctors pled for her to eat, but grief has made her hollow. You see her sitting by the window in the late afternoons, gazing at the avenue where carriages once came and went. Her husband's cigar box still lies on the table beside her, unopened. Across the empire, the machinery of state grinds onward. King George V, her son, takes the throne in measured silence. You follow him through the council chamber where ministers swear allegiance. His expression is grave, his posture rigid. He signs his name, George R.I., with a hand that trembles only once. Outside the palace gates, the crowd cheers faintly, uncertain whether celebration is permitted yet. The age has changed overnight. The glittering looseness of Edwardian pleasure gives way to a colder discipline. In the colonies, memorial services fill the churches. From Bombay to Cape Town, governors read identical sermons. A father to his people has gone to rest. Telegraph lines hum with condolences. In Paris, theaters dim their lights for a minute's silence. Even in Berlin, the Kaiser orders the flags lowered, though rivalry had defined their blood-tied thrones. You drift through these places like smoke, sensing the strange unity of loss that stretches across oceans. Yet beneath the solemnity lies unease. The merchants whisper that business has slowed. The stock market shivers at every rumor. The politicians speak of succession, alliances, the uncertain role of a new monarch less worldly, more cautious. The empire feels older suddenly, as if a bright theater curtain has fallen to reveal the scaffolding behind it. Weeks pass. In Sandringham, the estate that Edward loved most, the servants keep his rooms unchanged. The bed remains made, the cigar ends left untouched in their trays. The dogs, confused by their master's absence, wander the halls searching for his voice. You walk through those rooms in silence, the walls lined with hunting trophies. Photographs of dinners, portraits of women smiling into forgotten mirrors. The air holds that unmistakable after scent of life abruptly stopped. Summer arrives. The lawns of London grow green again. Children begin to laugh openly in parks. The black draperies come down one by one. Yet traces of mourning persist in the smallest things. A widow clutching a folded newspaper. A cab driver removing his hat as he passes the palace gates. An empty chair in a gentleman's club left untouched because that was His Majesty's place. Queen Alexandra retreats to Marlborough House. You follow her there through echoing corridors, past portraits of happier years. She spends her evenings arranging photographs, him in uniform, him at dinner, him smiling beside his racehorses. She speaks aloud to no one in particular. He looked so handsome that day at the Derby. Sometimes she touches the frame as though it were skin. On the first anniversary of his death, she visits Windsor alone. The chapel is cool, filled with the scent of polish and candle wax. You drift beside her as she kneels before the marble tomb. The inscription gleams faintly. Edward VII, peace. Perfect peace. She lays a wreath of lilies, then presses her gloved hand to the stone. For a moment, her shoulders shake beneath the veil. When she stands, she whispers a single phrase, something between prayer and farewell. Outside, the world has moved on. Aeroplanes hum faintly above the fields. Automobiles rattle through London. Men speak already of tensions on the continent. The empire rolls forward into the new century, unaware that war waits only 4 years away. You watch the crowds moving beneath the new king's banners, thinking how swiftly grief turns to habit, and habit to forgetfulness. As dusk settles, you return once more to Buckingham Palace. The lamps are lit again, golden squares glowing against the blue London night. The sound of distant music drifts from an open window, soft, hesitant, almost joyful. The life that once gathered around Edward VII has dispersed, absorbed into the quiet rhythm of a new reign. You pause at the grand staircase, where months earlier the footman carried the king's body toward its final journey. The air here is clean now, the marble polished, yet if you breathe deeply enough, you might still catch the faintest trace of cigars, cologne, and dying roses, the perfume of an age that believed it would last forever. History closes the door softly. The empire continues to march, but the laughter that once filled its palaces has faded into memory. And you, silent observer, are left among the echoes, where even the footsteps of kings grow faint. And the sound that remains is only the ticking of time itself. Years pass, the black crape fades from London's windows, and dust gathers where candles once burned through the nights of mourning. Yet still, his name lingers, in the pages of newspapers yellowing on library shelves, in statues streaked with rain, in the murmurs of old courtiers who remember when laughter echoed down the palace halls. You move through this quieter England, unseen as ever. The empire stands intact, its colonies humming with trade, its armies polished and ready. But something in its spirit has changed. The Edwardian age has become legend, polished by nostalgia into something gentler than it was. The public remembers not the swollen fingers or the purple lips, but the charm. The king who shook every hand, who smiled at every crowd, who made monarchy feel almost human. In the drawing rooms of London, people still toast to "dear old Bertie." They speak of his diplomacy, of how his personal friendships with European royals once kept peace across fragile borders. Few mention the irony that those same alliances will unravel into war just 4 years after his death. History has a way of making saints of the conveniently absent. You drift through Buckingham Palace once more. The corridors are quieter now, more formal. King George V rules with a stern sense of duty, stripped of indulgence. The scent of cigars and perfume that once clung to these walls has been replaced by ink, paper, and order. Yet sometimes, when the light strikes the mirrors just so, you almost imagine the old king's reflection lingering, a heavier silhouette, smiling faintly at his son's restraint. In the private archives, a clerk records the inventory of Edward's possessions. The list is long. diamond-studded cigarette cases, monogrammed walking sticks, portraits of actresses, gifts from maharajas, hunting trophies, each object catalogued, boxed, stored. The glamour that once dazzled Europe now sits under dust sheets. You stand among them, rows of forgotten luxuries gleaming dimly in the dark. The empire that celebrated excess now measures legacy in ledgers. Outside, new inventions fill the world. Motorcars replace carriages, electric light hums in drawing rooms. The first airplanes carve trembling lines across the clouds. The pace of life quickens. Yet something of Edward's leisurely grandeur persists, in the fashions, in the manners, in the illusion that civility could protect against chaos. But history remembers differently. By 1914, when the cannons of war thunder over Europe, many whisper that had Edward lived, his diplomacy might have kept peace. Others doubt it, the uncle of Europe. They call him now a man whose charm built bridges across nations but whose indulgence symbolized the empire's decline. You listen to their debates across dinner tables, the clink of glasses punctuating theories. None can agree whether he was savior or symptom. Queen Alexandra lives on, wrapped in mourning until her death in 1925. You visit her one last time at Sandringham House, where she sits surrounded by portraits of him, photographs from hunting parties, coronations, garden strolls. Her eyesight fades, yet she claims she can still see his face in the flicker of lamplight. When she dies, she is buried beside him at Windsor, her coffin resting only inches from his. After 15 years, they are reunited in the silence of stone. Decades turn, rain darkens the statues, soot gathers in the creases of their bronze faces. The figure of Edward VII on horseback, once gleaming, now stands weathered and green in Parliament Square. People pass without looking. Children feed pigeons at the base of his plinth, unaware of the monarch's story. The world he ruled has vanished, its manners, its empires, its confidence swallowed by the century that followed. You wander through the royal vault again. The air is cool and still. The marble glows faintly under the dim electric lights added long after his burial. His name remains carved clearly, the dates crisp as the day they were chiseled. Yet the flowers at his tomb are plastic now, placed by caretakers who never knew his reign. Dust gathers along the seams of the floor. You kneel beside the stone, tracing the letters with invisible hands. The scent of roses, faint, artificial, hangs in the air. Somewhere above, tourists walk through Windsor's halls, their footsteps echoing over the tombs of kings. They do not know they walk above the embalmed body of a man who once defined an era. You do. You can almost hear it, the faint heartbeat of history, muffled by centuries of silence. Outside, the world has long since moved on. The British Empire that once stretched across the globe is now a memory scattered among nations. Yet the Edwardian age remains a ghost of beauty before the storm, a twilight world of silk and smoke, laughter and decay, the last great illusion of gentility before modernity tore the curtain away. You stand once more before his monument in the drizzle of a London afternoon. Traffic hums, umbrellas bloom and close, and the king's face, cast in metal, gazes eternally toward the mall he once rode with pride. Rain streaks his cheeks like tears. The bronze horse beneath him stands mid-stride, forever moving and forever still. It strikes you then. The truest legacy is not the crown, nor the empire, nor the marble tomb. It is the silence that follows after applause, the pause between one age and the next. Edward VII was that silence made flesh, the last echo of old Europe before the world caught fire. As evening settles, you walk away through the mist, past the palace gates, past the guards, past the city that no longer remembers. The bells of Westminster chime 6 times, and their sound trembles through the fog like a heartbeat fading into history. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness. The years have thinned the noise of his reign into a whisper. In libraries, his portraits hang where few look up. In schoolbooks, his name occupies a single line between the grief of Victoria and the fire of war. Yet when you stand within St. George's Chapel again, you feel what words have forgotten, the density of silence that presses against the tombs of kings. You drift closer to his resting place. The marble is cold, the letters still sharp. Edward VII, 1841 to 1910. Dust has gathered in the grooves. Soft as ash, the air smells faintly of wax and limestone. And beneath it all, the ghost of something human, the memory of the body that once ruled a world. You think of the physicians who injected his veins with formalin so that his skin would not rot too quickly. You think of the lilies that masked the scent of mortality for only a few days. You think of the Queen, dressed in black until her own death, whispering to a photograph. These fragments remain long after the flesh is gone, and they tell a truth more enduring than monuments. Everything magnificent carries its own quiet rot. Outside, the empire that bore his name has already dissolved into 1,000 different flags. The colonies he governed now speak their own tongues. The statues erected to him stand darkened by pollution and time. The crowns that glittered at his funeral have dulled in the vaults of museums. History has absorbed him, not cruelly, but efficiently, as it does all who once believed themselves indispensable. You move through Windsor's corridors, the same ones where he drew his final breath, and you notice how ordinary they have become. The carpets are new, the portraits polished, the air clean of sickness. Visitors walk them daily, their camera shutters clicking softly where once the sound was the groan of dying lungs. It is this contrast, between what endures and what disappears, that defines the silence after the crown. The lesson is older than any monarchy. All splendor decays into dust, all noise into echoes. Power is only a momentary postponement of the inevitable stillness. In one forgotten alcove near the chapel door, you find a single relic, a tarnished program from his coronation in 1902. Edges curled, ink faded to brown. You hold it up to the light. It lists the hymns sung that day, the oaths sworn, the names of dignitaries now long dead. Beneath the seal of the crown, a Latin phrase reads, Dieu et mon droit, God in my right. You imagine how his hand must have trembled when he first signed those words, believing perhaps that right was eternal, that the crown would always weigh the same upon the heads that bore it. But here, in this silence, even language feels temporary. As dusk falls over Windsor, the chapel bells begin to toll. The sound travels through the stone, deep and resonant, filling the air where his breath once hung. The vibration hums in your bones before fading into the evening mist. You step outside into the courtyard. The sky is bruised with twilight, and rain begins to fall, slow, cold drops striking the cobblestones like the ticking of a great invisible clock. Each drop a reminder. Every empire ends. Every body yields. Every story, no matter how golden its beginning, concludes in quiet. You turn for one last look at the castle, its towers etched against the dim horizon, its flag hanging limp in the wet air. Somewhere inside, behind marble and brass, lies the embalmed heart of an age that mistook permanence for truth. You listen until the bells are gone, until only the rain remains. And as the mist thickens around you, the palace fades into gray, and so do you, another ghost in a world that no longer remembers, carrying one last echo of a king who lived for pleasure and died surrounded by silence.